The town of Ashford had always been quiet, tucked between endless pine forests and a river that whispered through the night. Outsiders called it peaceful. Locals, they called it cursed. No one ever spoke of the thing that lived beneath the old mill, not directly anyway. They just called it. Evelyn Hart had never planned to come back. She had escaped Ashford 15 years ago, swearing she would never return after her brother, Daniel, vanished without a trace on a fog-drenched October night. But when her mother passed away, the old family house became hers, and the town pulled her back like a tide she couldn't resist. Walking through the front door was like stepping back in time. The house smelled of dust and old pine sap. The floral wallpaper was peeling away from the plaster in long, brittle strips, like sunburnt skin. Evelyn unpacked slowly, her hands trembling as she picked up a framed photograph of Daniel. His smile was frozen in time, a happy, carefree kid, but his eyes seemed to follow her, watching her from the past. That very first night, Evelyn dreamed of the mill. It was a vivid, terrifying nightmare. She saw its rotting wooden beams, the giant water wheel frozen in a cage of rust, and the stagnant black water that pooled beneath it. And then, something stirred in those dark depths. Something ancient and aware, something that knew her name. Ashford hadn't changed much on the surface. The diner on Main Street still served coffee that tasted a little burnt. The old sheriff still sat on the bench outside his station, chewing tobacco and watching the world go by. But the people had changed. Their eyes were hollow, their shoulders slumped, and their voices were always hushed, like they were afraid of being overheard. When Evelyn tried to ask about her brother, Daniel, a heavy silence would fall over the room. At the diner, the waitress dropped her pen with a clatter. The sheriff just cleared his throat and spat. Best not to dig, he'd warned her, his voice low. Some things are better left buried. That night, back in the oppressive silence of her mother's house, Evelyn heard a scratching sound coming from inside the walls. At first, she dismissed it. Rats, probably. But the sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Like long fingernails were tracing words into the plaster from the other side. She pressed her ear against the cool, peeling wallpaper and held her breath. Through the drywall, she heard a faint, dry whisper that chilled her to the bone. It said, it remembers, the mill stood at the edge of town like a skeletal guardian, abandoned for decades. Drawn by a morbid curiosity she couldn't explain, Evelyn walked there at dusk, the sky bruised with the purples and oranges of an approaching storm. The huge wooden wheel groaned in the wind, a lonely sound as if it still longed to turn, even though the river that once powered it was now just a dry, rocky bed. Inside, the air was thick and heavy with the smell of mold and decay. Massive wooden beams sagged precariously overhead, and then she heard it. From beneath the floorboards, a sound she recognized from her nightmares, breathing, slow, deep, and deliberate. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she found a loose, rotted plank and pried it up. Absolute darkness stared back at her from the abyss below. Something moved down there. It was slow, massive, and its shape was all wrong. It wasn't human. Her flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering. For a split second, a single, horrifying moment, she saw a face. It wasn't Daniel's. It wasn't anyone she knew. It was a face with no features at all, no eyes, no nose, no mouth stretched perfectly smooth like a mask of wet clay. And from that featureless face, a voice echoed in her mind. It whispered, "You came back." You learned quickly in Ashford that the children never played near the mill. Evelyn started noticing strange things, little circles of salt drawn on doorsteps. Kids carrying small knives carved from bone. One afternoon, she met a boy named Caleb, no older than 10, sitting alone on a park swing. His eyes were wide with a fear that seemed far too old for his face, and his voice trembled when he spoke. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, not even looking at her. "It knows you. It's hungry. What is it?" Evelyn asked, kneeling down to his level. Caleb just shook his head slowly, his knuckles white as he gripped the swing's chains. "It's not a what?" he whispered. "It's a forever." That night, Evelyn dreamed again. This time, it was Daniel. He was standing at the foot of her bed, his skin waxy and pale, his eyes two pits of endless black. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, there was only a sound like rushing water, a roar that filled the room and her head, drowning everything else out. The riverbed had been dry for years, a long, snaking scar through the landscape. Yet, Evelyn found herself following its path, walking where the water used to flow. At a sharp bend near the forest's edge, she found them. Bones, piles of them, animal and human, all bleached bone-white by the sun. As she stood there, frozen in horror, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The bones shifted, scraping against each other, rearranging themselves into words in the dirt. "It waits." She turned and ran, scrambling back towards the trees, but the forest seemed to close in around her. The pines bent inward, their branches like claws scratching at her face and clothes. She heard footsteps behind her, heavy, wet, dragging footsteps. She risked a glance over her shoulder, but nothing was there. Only the oppressive silence of the woods and that same horrible whisper winding through the trees. "You belong to me." Back in the suffocating safety of the house, a desperate search led her to find her mother's journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the bedroom closet. The entries were frantic, the handwriting growing more erratic with each page, scrawled in a mix of ink and what looked horrifyingly like dried blood. Daniel was chosen. The town feeds it. We all feed it. If we don't, it takes us anyway. Evelyn's hand shook so hard she could barely hold the book. Her mother had known. They all had. The entire town was complicit in this nightmare. The final entry was smeared, but the words were still chillingly clear. "Evelyn, if you return, it will claim you too." On the night of the harvest moon, a strange energy gripped the town. Evelyn saw people walking towards the edge of town, their faces grim and determined. Hidden in the shadows of the forest, she followed them to the mill. The townsfolk gathered in a silent circle around the black pit of water. They carried offerings, goats, chickens, even family dogs. One by one, they slit the animals' throats, letting the warm blood spill into the dark water. The water began to boil and churn. A shape rose from the depths, massive and formless, a living entity made of shadow and slime, dripping with the darkness of the pit. Its face was the same smooth, featureless horror she'd seen before. Its body seemed to have no end. The townsfolk began to chant, their voices a low, hypnotic drone. "It feeds, it lives, it keeps us." The sound broke something inside Evelyn. She let out a scream of pure terror. The shape turned its blank face toward her. "You are mine." And then, from the churning water, another figure rose. It was Daniel. His body was broken and wrong, his eyes hollow voids. He reached a cold, dripping hand toward Evelyn. "Help me," he whispered, his voice a gurgle. But before she could move, the massive shape loomed behind him. It enveloped him, swallowed him whole, and dragged him back beneath the surface without a sound. Evelyn ran. She ran for her life, but the townspeople blocked her path, their eyes empty, their mouths still moving in that silent, awful chant. "You belong to it," they all seemed to say in unison, a single mind in many bodies. She managed to break through and fled back to the house, barricading the doors, piling furniture against them. But it was useless. The whispers grew louder, coming from all around her now, from inside the walls, from under the floor. The walls themselves began to bleed a dark, thick liquid. She found the salt, the bone knives, the journal, all the pathetic defenses the town used, but nothing stopped the sound. The floor in the living room began to split open, a black chasm widening in the wood. Darkness poured out like a flood. And from those depths, she heard Daniel's voice, clear as day. "Join me. Clutching one of the sharpened bone knives, Evelyn screamed. She plunged it into her own chest, a final, desperate act. She hoped death would be an escape, a way to free herself from this town and its curse. But death was not freedom. Evelyn opened her eyes. She was standing in the mill. The townsfolk were gone. The night was silent. The water below was perfectly black, perfectly still, like a pane of polished obsidian. She looked down at her reflection. A smooth face stared back, hollow, empty eyes. She was no longer Evelyn. She was part of it now. And from the deepest part of her new consciousness, a single thought whispered, "Forever." And so, Ashford remained quiet. Outsiders still drove through and called it peaceful. But at night, especially on the night of the harvest moon, if you listen closely down by the old mill, you could hear something stir. It waited. It remembered. And it was always hungry. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more tales from the shadows.